What's up, Misfits? Welcome back to the James Kennedy podcast. I hope you're all feeling good. I've had this cold for the past 2 weeks that I just cannot shift, man. I went on holiday to Greece week before last, I think, and that was awesome. You know, went to Santorini next, saw sunning it up, baby, swimming in the sea at like 10 o'clock at night in the pitch black. Absolute paradise on earth, that place is. And as soon as I've come back, I've just been smashed in the face with this relentless, unshiftable cold that just will not go. I never really get ill that much. I'm pretty healthy because I live such a boring life. But yeah, this thing just will not go, man. It's like trashing my voice. So if I sound like I've been like hitting the bong too much, it's not that. Like I said, I live a very boring life. So, my bong smoking days are literally decades behind me. It's not that. It's just that I've got this relentless cold that just will not go. Maybe it's divine punishment for all the chopsing I've been doing lately about the royal family. Chopsing, I should remind you for all those listeners who aren't from Wales, basically just means mouthing off. Now, in my defense, I would never dream of chopsing or mouthing off about the royal family at such a sensitive time as they've lost recently the head of their family, Queen Elizabeth II, who very recently passed away, as I'm sure everybody on planet Earth is now aware. And with myself being a lifelong anti-royalist, obviously the temptation was always there to comment on such a ubiquitous and unrelenting news event as that. Because, I comment on everything. That's what I do. But I exercised some humane restraint on this one, which was a first for me, because at the end of the day, despite my political feelings about, the monarchy and the royal family and the institution of all that stuff, an actual person had passed away here, a person who had a family and was loved by many people, a grandmother to some and a mother to others, a real person. And you have to put your politics and your opinions aside to be sensitive to the people who are grieving, I'm not a fucking monster. And also, this is a person who was loved by millions of people the world over, who's been in everybody's life for as long as we can remember, an iconic figure. A figure who millions of people look up to and inspired by and revere. And I get that, I understand it. But the onslaught of media attention that just went on and on and on and on and on about it just made it very tempting to wade in and add your comment to it. And I resisted. So instead, what I just said was, on social media, I just simply said, no comment. That was it. I just posted those 2 words. I just said no comment. What I meant by that was, it was clear that I was aware of, what was going on. How could you not be? It was everywhere. And for those people that follow me on social media, they know that I tend to mouth off about, every sort of news event that happens. So it would have been kind of strange if I didn't say anything. And I think if I didn't say anything at all, that would have been taken as disrespectful, I suppose, that I just didn't care and I just carried on promoting my podcast or whatever, But at the same time, I wasn't going to join the grief party because this isn't the person that I knew personally. The actual real grief is exclusive to the family and the people that knew her, and that should be respected. The other stuff, the public outpouring of mourning, I think you'd have to be a royalist really to get deeply involved in that, and I'm not. I've been an outspoken anti-royalist, for my entire life. So I'm not going to be gushing with reverence and grief over, an institution that I don't believe in and that I think is undemocratic and we shouldn't have it in this day and age. But the time wouldn't have been right to have said that at a time of national mourning about a person who has an actual family grieving. So I opted for saying no comment because by doing that, I was hoping to make it apparent, to my followers that, obviously I am aware of what's happening, but no, I'm not going to slag off the monarchy this time. But no, I'm also not going to go gushing with reverence for a person I've never met and an institution I don't believe in. So I just said no comment and left it at that. And man, if I did, Jesus Christ. I haven't had an online ass kicking like that since the time I said I didn't think Eric Clapton was all that. And it wasn't the scale of it, really. It was just the intensity of it, the aggression and the nastiness of it. Not that affects me because I don't care. If I did, I wouldn't say the things I say. I literally don't care. But it was just interesting to see how those 2 simple little words that weren't saying anything at all, really, other than what each side projected into it, just seemed to really kick the fucking wasp's nest. I mean, people went for it, man. And it's interesting that these days, it's almost like the people who are the biggest bullies and the most aggressive, trying to shut everybody down, are almost the people who seem to claim some kind of monopoly on compassion and righteousness. It's something that we see so much these days on the internet, is that if you even imply the slightest offense to somebody's sensibilities, they will just come at you with such venom and nastiness. And the bullying group mentality, the herd mentality, where they all just dive in on you, is something to see, man. Fortunately, I'm of an age where I don't care. None of these comments or these, attempts at hurting my feelings make the slightest dent on me at all. I literally couldn't care less. It doesn't hurt me or affect me in the slightest. But I just think it's interesting to see that shift. It's almost like the people who see themselves as the most progressive and liberal and enlightened and compassionate have almost become now the biggest bullies online, the most aggressive, bitchy and nasty group of people on the internet. And I think it's a dangerous force because, people are getting cancelled and people kill themselves over this stuff. It's crazy just because of like bitchy name calling. Personally, I feel that when you have to resort to those kinds of attacks, you've already lost the argument. That is not the action of the righteous, that's the action of the desperate. So it was interesting that this event kind of highlighted a lot of stuff. And it raises a lot of questions now as well about the status of the monarchy post Queen Elizabeth II. It raises questions about how we identify ourselves as a nation in 2022 moving forward. It raises questions about the nature of our democracy and what it means to be British. So I thought we'd try and unpack some of this stuff and do a whole episode on the monarchy. Now, it's going to be biased because it's my show and I'm anti-monarchy, but it's going to be done respectfully. This isn't, a bitch fest or anything happening here. We'll leave that to you guys on Twitter. But I'm hoping that within the intensity of the one-sided conversation we've had projected at us on this issue from all of the mainstream news across the board, to provide a little bit of balance here, to give the other side of the conversation an airing. And hopefully, some of you people who are royalists might find some things in the following conversation that give you food for thought, or that you find it interesting, or questions that you agree need answering. So without further ado, we're going to introduce today's guest, Mr. Nick Wall. Now, Nick Wall is a member of the campaign group Republic, and he also chairs the group Labour for a Republic. He's a very knowledgeable and articulate spokesperson for the cause, and I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with him today. So, without further ado, let's welcome onto the show, Mr. Nick Wall. How you feeling, man?
I'm very well, James. Look, thanks for inviting me on. It's fantastic. It all feels a bit rock and roll. I see you had Frank Turner on a couple of weeks ago. So, so it does feel rock and roll for me. And I hope that, you're broadcasting all this dangerous democracy stuff that we're not going to see you in the tower. But let's keep our fingers crossed on that, shall we?
Hey, the tower will be a dream, man. I got to worry about Twitter. Okay. I'm hoping that today's chat with yourself is not going to further poke that specific wasp's nest, and if it does, it'll happen in a much more informed and informative manner that I'm clearly able to deliver by myself.
Okay.
So to kick off, shall we start by establishing what the official narrative is? Let's start with the official line and take it from there. So what is the official role of the monarchy in modern Britain? What is it that the believers believe that they do?
Well, that's a really good question, because actually quite a lot of it is shrouded in secrecy. But before I get into that, can I just mention a couple of things, James, just by way of context? Because as you say, I am chair of a group called Labour for a Republic, and we campaign within the Labour Party for a continuation of the journey towards a republic. And it's really, really important in our view, and hopefully your listeners will agree and may want to engage more after this podcast. But, as we speak, just by way of context, there's the economy, the government's lost control of the economy. We've got problems in terms of employee relations. We've got problems in the health service. We've got a huge cost of living crisis. So to us, it is a really important subject, but nothing is more important right now for the country, so far as we're concerned, as getting a Labour government. That's priority one. So what does the monarchy do? Well, it's got essentially a constitutional role, or at least two members of the monarchy have. And so there's the sort of ceremonial stuff that we all see on our TV quite extensively. Then there are sort of obligations in terms of the legislative process. So, acts of parliament and so on, legislation will get royal assent. And that's, if you like, I guess, the formal role. They do other stuff that they may choose to do, but in terms of constitutionally, that's really about it. But it's that's the bit, I guess, that the public, they want the public to see, behind the scenes, if you like. The reality is, politically, there's a great deal more, going on. So Labour for Republic essentially sees, republic, becoming a republic, as the end game of a journey we're already on, and that journey is essentially making the country more democratic. And over the years, with the extension of the franchise for everyone to vote, and in recent years, things like devolution and reform of the House of Lords, these are all parts of the same journey towards a place where all the power rests with the people.
Yeah.
And the people exercise that power through their elected representatives. And of course, what the monarchy has is a huge amount of power, which is unchecked and very often simply, not known about. So, whilst the monarchy has this formal role, behind the scenes, as I say, there's stuff going on. So, for example, the monarchy, well, probably best to do it like this. The monarchy really has there's three issues we really have with the concept of monarchy. The first is that it has direct power without any accountability whatsoever. Yeah. So, for example, in the case of a hung parliament, the monarch would choose who the prime minister is going to be. It can dissolve parliament. And it's got this really huge, significant power called the King's consent now, King's consent. Shrouded in secrecy, but essentially what it boils down to is that any legislation, anything at all, on any subject you like to mention, if it any way impacts upon on the monarchy itself, so it could be employment rights, it could be environmental protection, it could be all sorts of things. The King's consent is needed first and foremost before that piece of legislation can even be debated. Now that applies not just in Parliament in the UK, but in the devolved parliaments as well. Queen's consent also means that, or King's consent means that the monarch can intervene. And in fact, it's a really good investigation by The Guardian and a guy called Adam Tucker in Liverpool University that uncovered that since the 1960s, the monarch and the heir to the throne had intervened over 1,000 times on legislation to in some way tweak it. And in fact, they're exempt from 160 pieces of legislation. Most recently in 2021, the monarchy was exempt from legislation in Scotland on environmental protection. But it's also meant, for example, the royal household is, and the monarchy is exempt from the Race Relations Act. So the monarch negotiated an exemption from that, which might lead listeners to think, well, why would any organisation want to be exempt from a piece of legislation that protects workers, people who work for the monarchy, from discrimination on racial basis?
Yeah.
But it's worse because they're also exempt from the Sex Discrimination Act.
Jesus Christ. This
is something that the monarchy has petitioned for and has successfully been granted. And as I say, those are probably the most stunning, frankly, aren't they?
Yeah.
It's stunning that, any organisation that's state-funded should be exempt or be allowed to be exempt from that sort of legislation. So the monarchy has direct power without any accountability. They can do all these things, and frankly, no one's going to stop them, or nobody can stop them. The second thing is that the monarchy, which is supposedly there to protect our constitution, such as it is, we're only one of think I think it's three democracies in the whole world that hasn't got a written constitution, and perhaps we can talk a bit more about that. But the monarchy can't protect the constitution. So, for example, back in 2019, Boris Johnson was getting a real rough ride in Parliament over his disastrous Brexit shenanigans and bill and so on. And so he decided the best way to get out of this is to prorogue Parliament, which basically means, suspending Parliament. So there would be no scrutiny. So literally no questions can be asked. And he went to the monarch, the Queen, and said, yeah, this is all fine. And the Queen said, yeah, that's fine. So it then turned out that actually that was illegal. So that was an illegal proroguing of Parliament. But it demonstrates that the monarchy, dependent as it is on the government for its support, the quid pro quo, if you like, is that essentially the monarch does what the prime minister says. So there's this problem of the constitution not being protected. The third issue of monarchy is that the existence of the monarch gives huge powers to the prime minister, which he or she can enact without referring to anybody, including Parliament. So the Prime Minister, using the royal prerogative, as it's called, can wage war, sign treaties, sign trade deals, all sorts of stuff, which is really, really significant and has a material impact on all our lives. All of that can be done essentially in the name of the monarch, but it's just a rubber stamp, and it's the Prime Minister who decides. So not only is all this stuff, this democracy stuff, which we, in principle, we believe strongly that it's just not right.
Yeah.
But also, of course, it also means that the monarch isn't equal before the law, as we believe everybody should be. Regardless of your birthright, we should all be equal before the law. But quite obviously, the monarchy and the monarch isn't. And that cannot be right. So we have a very principled objection to monarchy. We think it is contrary to certainly Labour's values of democracy and equality. But we think, contrary to most people's values.
Yeah.
And what we're trying to do in Labour for Republic, and indeed Republic, the national organisation that talks to the whole country, not just the Labour Party, but the whole country about this issue, is to get that conversation going. Because it's funny, James, but there's yet been a situation where I've had a conversation with even diehard monarchists, and they haven't raised their eyebrows, at least, to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
So what the monarchy and all those with a vested interest in keeping the monarchy in place want to do is to close down the conversation.
Yeah.
That's key. So that's why it's so good to be on this particular podcast, because once people start thinking about it, they start engaging in it, which is great.
Yeah, and closing down the conversation does seem to be the weapon of choice, from the monarchy and, the media and the supporters. I mean, we have seen, massive backlashes against any variance in the official narrative. People have been arrested for holding up signs, and like I said in my preamble, just the sheer scale of the intense aggression online that happens with anybody who has an opposing view, no matter how articulately or diplomatically delivered. It's unlike anything we've seen in modern times, I think. And I know that it is an emotionally charged time right now, but I think that makes it all the more important for us to have this conversation and to not let those forces bully us into silence and submission and dominate the accepted narrative.
Yeah.
But keeping it with the official narrative just for a second, the Queen or the King is essentially the head of state. We do need a head of state. So what other models are there for having a head of state that we can look to around the world, which would be, in your opinion, a more preferable system to the unelected monarchical head of state system that we currently have in the UK?
Well, any model which is elected is preferable to unelected. Okay, so I mean that's quite clear, because what you see within the let's talk about. I mean, the Queen. I'd say a couple of things about the Queen. First and foremost, just commenting on your points about some of the tensions on social media and so on during the official mourning period and so on. Republicans didn't need to have a meeting to say we're going to show respect. We respect the fact that here's somebody that's given decades and decades of service, and we don't agree with what that service entails and its reason for being. We don't agree with it, but we certainly respect it. But I think the tension came from, and I think it's really important for people to understand this, that two things were happening simultaneously. The first thing was there was a death of somebody who a lot of people think a great deal of, and there was a mourning period, and that's absolutely right. But there was also a political process going on at the same time, which was a huge transfer of power from one monarch to another. There was political appointment. So a Prince of Wales was appointed, councillors were appointed, and so on and so forth. All this politics was going on during the period of mourning.
Yeah.
And of course, as Republicans, we respect the period of mourning, but we have to, and we want to, speak up against a political transfer of power, which is completely undemocratic. Now, that's why you saw, James, people being arrested for simply holding up signs saying "Not my king." Now, they weren't at funeral procession. They were at proclamations, political events where the king is proclaimed is a political event. And a lot of people say, well, monarchy is tradition. Monarchy is tradition. It's fantastic. It's tradition. Well, so is, in this country, thank goodness, so is protest.
Yes.
Every bit as important.
Great point.
So I just wanted to sort of, comment on that. In terms of the heads of state, to get back to that, I mean, a lot of people, when they think of republicanism, certainly when over the last few decades, people have thought of, connotations with the IRA and so on. But nowadays, when you talk about republic, people tend to know what you're talking about, which is, an elected head of state. So that's one really good thing that's happened actually over the last decade, probably. Now, there's lots of models, and I heard James, is it James O'Brien on LBC?
Yeah.
I mean, he's normally really good. I mean, I think he's fantastic. But even he got in a muddle on this because saying, well, we don't want to, the usual whole chestnut. We don't want a President Blair. We don't want a President Trump, and so on. So USA is a good example of where you've got a president that's got executive powers. France is another example where you've got a president with executive powers. That's, if you like, broadly, there are different variations, but executive powers of a president. President is elected, but they're hugely powerful. So that's one model. The model that we prefer is something that's used, I guess, in, say, Germany or more closely in Ireland. So what we would advocate is that we essentially keep the political system as it is, with a House of Commons and devolved parliaments. We would absolutely, want an elected second chamber. But in terms of the head of state would be there to do two things. Number one, to do the ceremonial stuff, and we're perfectly happy for all the pomp and ceremony and the gold coaches and so on to stay. We just think that the person in the gold coach should be there on merit. And they don't necessarily need to be privileged, and they don't necessarily need to be white, and they don't necessarily need to be male, as our head of state will be for the next 100 years. Let's have a head of state that reflects the country.
Right.
So they do all the ceremonial stuff. But the second thing they would do, and this is the critical thing, is that they would protect our constitution, our written constitution. So we would assume, let's say we have a written constitution. It would say many things, but one of the things it might say is, you obey international law. So at the moment, to give you an example of how that would work, at the moment, this government, this Tory government, is brazenly saying it's going to break international law. It's going to just break it because it doesn't suit us or it doesn't suit them. Now, if the Constitution said, if we sign a treaty, we stick to it, we don't break international law, then at that point, the president would step in and the president would say, no, that does not meet our Constitution. That is in conflict or breaches our Constitution. And that might be the end of it, or the president he or she might refer it to the Supreme Court to make a judgment. So the president would need a mandate, which is why they need to be elected. But they don't necessarily need to be a politician. And we've got literally thousands of people in this country, who could do the job,
Right.
And just to illustrate that, because an emerging argument, and this is a legacy of the Boris Johnson government, I think, is that it's not so bad having a monarch because politicians are so terrible. Well, what an awful argument that is, And of course, with Charles, it seems to have been forgotten now. But just in the last years, in the last 12 months, we've had Charles fly into environmental conferences, to flying by helicopter to preach to people to stop flying. We've had Charles taking cash for honours, so literally taking cash in order to grant honours to people, and even worse, literally. I mean, this is literally what happened. Taking suitcases and carrier bags of cash from overseas dodgy businessmen. Now,
Right.
This is a guy who's had a 60-year apprenticeship. I think we can do much better, don't you?
Well, I was going to ask what your thoughts were on King Charles, and I know that you've got some, so please share them with us.
Yeah, well, I think two things. I mean, the first thing is that the Queen, to her credit, played a very good hand when it came to the politics. I mean, I can only remember her kind of intervening politically in any way, really in a major way once, and that was making some comments during the Scottish independence referendum, which were potentially political. But other than that, she was credited for playing a good hand. Charles is different. Charles is different. Now, as he has intervened and he has written, he's basically been a political lobbyist using taxpayers' money through the Duchy of Cornwall, using taxpayers' money to run his lobbying firm, if you like. And he's lobbied on all sorts of things, on reintroducing fox hunting, which 80% of the British population disagree with, reintroducing grammar schools, which certainly the Labour Party is against. We're against selective education, and so is most of the country. Homeopathy, that kind of thing.
Right.
He has intervened a great deal. So the first question for Charles is, can you change your spots? And the answer is, we don't know, because when Charles meets the Prime Minister every week, they don't talk about the weather, I assume. And we are told that the role of the monarch is to either, in quotes, encourage or to warn. Now, just think about that for a moment. What does that mean?
Yeah.
Encourage or to warn? Well, if a government goes along, a Labour government goes along and says, well, we're going to get rid of the remaining grammar schools because we don't believe in the unfairness of selective education, is he going to encourage that? Or is he going to warn against it? Well, of course, he's going to warn against it.
Yeah.
He's going to warn against it because it doesn't concur with his political view. Now, we won't know that because, of course, none of this stuff is published. The monarchy is exempt. Another exemption again, in law, they are exempt from the Freedom of Information Act. So when the monarch decided to pay for Prince Andrew's defence, for example, which practically everybody in the country thought was an absolute, disgraceful situation. The whole event was a disgraceful event. That was paid for by from the monarch's funds. Now we don't know where that exactly came from. Probably from the Duchy of Lancaster. If it did, then it is taxpayers' money. The point is that it all shrouded in secrecy.
Yeah.
So, to answer your question, the first thing is Charles will be a political king. And we hope that does two things. That one, that prime ministers and ministers have the backbone to stand up to him because, he may have been told all his life that he is a font of all wisdom. He is not. And two, we believe that will encourage more people to say, actually, this isn't working. Let's move towards an elected head of state. The second thing that we've been promised with Charles is modernization. Well, it's all relative, isn't it? I mean, if you have got a monarchy that basically runs the same as it did more or less 200 years ago, modernization is a very relative very relative thing.
Yeah.
And what worries us in Labour for Republic is that, and in Republic, is that politicians don't appear to be engaging in that invitation. So I don't know what Charles means by modernisation, but would it be helpful if I suggested a few things that he might want to look at? He might want to look at, for example, signing up to the Freedom of Information Act. So if the monarchy is indeed, a positive force in our society, if they do good things and they have good things to say, well, let's make it subject to the Freedom of Information Act, as is every other public body in the land. They could start paying tax. £750 million inheritance Charles has just received, he won't pay a penny. Of course, the monarch and the heir can pay income tax voluntarily. It's up to them, which is, talk to people who are, in low paid work, paying tax, literally scraping to make ends meet. And then you have, incredibly wealthy people funded by the state and not contributing in any way. It is frankly outrageous, as is so much of the stuff that surrounds the monarchy. On finance, he could invest in Britain. He was one of the names in a few years ago in the Panama Papers that was showing that he was investing in offshore companies, making millions and millions of pounds while the rest of us were in austerity. So he could invest in Britain. He could opt in to the Race Relations Act. He could opt in to the Sex Discrimination Act. Politicians could insist that the oath that MPs and members of the Scottish Parliament and members of the Welsh Parliament take could be changed. I mean, at the moment, the oath, James, is to the monarch and their heirs and, forever and a day. Frankly, it is stunning that we do this. And it's even more stunning, in my view, that the Labour Party does this, because the Labour Party was born to give more power to working people, to initially and essentially to alleviate poverty and to create employment. But it is astonishing that any politician wouldn't want to pledge an oath, first and foremost, to the country, and secondly, to the people. You could argue, thirdly, their constituents. But they don't, and they don't have to. But they have to pledge an oath to the monarch and the monarch's heirs, which is quite unbelievable when you play it back to yourself. Absolutely amazing. And of course, there are MPs who cannot take their seat because they on principle cannot swear that oath. And of course, you see MPs, don't you, crossing their fingers. So the system, if nothing else, right? The system, if nothing else, when a public is demanding that we have honesty from our politicians and are truthful with us, and we want to trust our politicians, the very thing the system makes them do, some of them, is to not be straight, because they have to say something they don't actually believe in order to do the job they were elected for. Now, It's crazy. So that's a short kind of to-do list for Charles. Labour for a Republic was writing to all MPs on this, all Labour MPs, and saying, look, this is an offer from the new monarch to modernise, but let's make sure it's the 21st century modernisation, and it's not about just bringing the monarchy into the 19th century. Let's take this opportunity, work with him, and let's see the monarchy truly reflecting the country we all live in.
Oof. Man, I'm glad I asked that question. That was a beautiful riff.
Yeah, well, sorry about that.
I don't apologize, man. That was glorious stuff. I totally enjoyed the rant, man.
Okay.
Now, you also mentioned some figures there, and that's something else I wanted to come around to because it's very important. I mean, in normal circumstances, the taxpayer is not expected to chip in to pay for the entire family of the head of state to all live lavishly in ivory towers. So could we go through some of the figures as to exactly what it does cost the British taxpayer to keep the royal family?
Yeah, I think yeah, it's a very valid question. It's one of the questions that very very often comes up, which is the monarchy is very good value for money. It's a bit like the other chestnut that always comes up is that the monarchy is good for tourism. Which the answer is, well, if that's the case, then we have Mickey Mouse as the head of state, don't we? I mean, that's the answer to that one. In actual fact, it's not. In fact, Visit Britain, which is the government organisation that looks after tourism coming to the UK, 4 or 5 years ago, said that the monarchy's effect is neutral. There's no measurable effect. And what happened then was, and this is more recently, is that the way in which these things are calculated in terms of the revenue that the monarchy can bring in, they kind of changed the rules. So, for example, they looked at the royal towns like Windsor, Bath, places like that, and said, if you visit there, you spend any money there, that's essentially been generated by the royal family. So, if you go to I don't know, Windsor Legoland, which twice as many people go to Windsor Legoland than Windsor Castle. But you may not know this, but your motivation to go to Windsor Legoland was, in fact, your respect and love for the monarchy. I mean, you may not know that, but it's clearly what is inferred. But in terms of the costs, so there's a sovereign grant which comes from Parliament, and that is the number that the monarchy and the government uses, which is about 80 million last year. It's a remarkable grant. It can never go down. It can only go up. Okay, that's right. The way it's written. So it's not about how much money the monarchy needs. They get the money, then they decide what they're going to do with it, and it just keeps going up. But the 82 million last year, what's not in it? Well, what's not in it is security costs. So we're not talking about security costs for the monarch and the heir to the throne. We're talking about security costs for the whole royal family, the, in inverted commas, working royals. I'll have to say more about that later if you like. But anyway, the working royals, not only their home, but the many homes that they have. So the new Prince of Wales, I think he's just gone into his third home now. Each of those will have full-time security, So the conservative estimate on there is £100 million on security. You've then got every time anytime any member of the royal family visits whatever they visit, come to see a leisure centre being built, open a leisure centre or whatever it might be. Not that we're opening many leisure centres under this government, but anyway, you've got my point. They open something, they want to see something.
Yeah.
That visit, the cost of that visit is absorbed by the local authority. Now, we don't know what the total of that is, but might be worth people thinking, if they have a royal visit and then, maybe sometime in the future, their library is closed down, you might want to think, well, what would have been a better value for money? But, I'll leave that to people to think about. So there's local authority. So that cost is not included in the costings. Then there's the surplus profits from what are called the duchies. So the Duchy of Lancaster goes to the monarch, and the Duchy of Cornwall, the profits go to the heir to the throne. And what they are is a portfolio of property, land, investments, huge. And that generates about £20 million a year each in profits. But all of those assets are owned by the people. They are there to create an income for the monarch and the heir to the throne to spend as they wish. And as I say, Charles spends a lot of his, or has spent a lot of his, on political lobbying. So there's about £40 million there. And there's then there's income. I mean, a lot of the actual land, including shoreline, for example, in the UK, is owned by the monarchy, and that feeds through into the sovereign grant. So it's quite interesting, really, and very topical, because Labour has just announced, some really fantastic policies on a great British energy company, and that being effectively a green energy company. And it's an absolutely what Labour does, transformational stuff, that is going to see us good for years, like the health service, like comprehensive education. It's just going to see us good for years. But the fact is, the land is owned by either the duchy or by the monarch or whatever it might be, and they are going to see some of the profits of that.
Right.
So Republic were pretty good on this side. So you can see more on republic.org. .uk. So Republic have costed it around about 340 million a year, and we'll see what Charles offers, because I suspect one of the things he'll want to do is to cut back the number of, in inverted commas, working royals. I don't know. We'll see. So about 340 million a year, and it is, I think, it's this secrecy thing. If we are paying this money for any institution, not just the royal family. If the state is paying for whatever it might be, then that should be a matter of public record. There doesn't need to be any secrecy. Let's just, if they're good value for money, then what's the problem?
Absolute insanity. I mean, if we had an elected head of state, I'm imagining the costs for this would be significantly different.
Well, of course it would, because you'd have one person. It would be reasonable to expect that person to have security and for their family to have security, and that would be it. You wouldn't have, they wouldn't have an income from, they would be paid for the job, but they wouldn't have an income from a portfolio which nets them £20 million a year for good grief. For good grief, it just wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have a situation where the head of state had numerous residences which had to be protected, and so on and so forth. So, of course, with a head of state, it is infinitely more cost effective. I'm going to say cheaper, but cost effective. Let's put it that way. But democracy does cost, so there would be a cost there, but it would be much less.
Yeah,
and that's really important to an awful lot of people. It's really important to Republicans. Whether it's as important overall as this whole principle of democracy and the whole principle of equality. And I should say, I think I mentioned earlier that, Labour and most people in this country, we want to see organizations and leaders that reflect the country. And the fact is, for the rest of my life, and for everybody who's listening to this right now, you are going to have a privileged, white, male head of state for the rest of your life, and potentially well into the next century. Now, that in 21st century Britain, I find that quite astounding, and to be honest, a little bit depressing. Well, actually, very depressing, because if I was to say to you, James, look, here's an organization that's run for the state, it's paid for by the state, and I just want to let you know that the CEO is going to be privileged, white and male for the rest of the century. What would you say to me? You'd probably say, well, actually, Nick, that sounds a bit like an institutionally racist organization. Well, wouldn't you? I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Labour for Republic's slogan, if you like, is democracy, equality, no exceptions. And the no exceptions is there because so often, whether it's Charles taking his carrier bags of cash, whether it's the secrecy, whether it's the cash for honours, all the things we're talking about now, so often it's shrouded in secrecy, and an exception is made. An exception is made for the monarchy that wouldn't be made for anybody else, and this is quite outrageous in a democracy. And one of the reasons why, we're pretty confident, step by step we'll get there. We are simply on a road here. We're on a journey to a republic, because we have just been ticking off milestones as we go along. And we're hoping now, and we're looking forward, and the reason why we campaign is for those next steps to be taken. And at some point, it will become irresistible that, the only way to run a country in a grown-up way is to have complete and utter transparency, and to have is to have a head of state that is elected and can act because they have the permission of the people to act, not because of accident to birth.
100%, and beautifully put. I mean, I'm amazed that there's not more support for this, really. But I'm guessing there probably is, but as I mentioned earlier, it gets drowned out by the noise of the propaganda machine. You know, the complete dominance that the royal family's press department has over all aspects of this conversation. I mean, do you have any indication of the public's support for a republic and moving away from a monarchy into having an elected head of state? Do we have any indication of what the public support is for that?
Yeah, we do. I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, you think about it, we are, the propaganda is a good word, because it is, because you think about it, the press is overwhelmingly, supporting the monarchy, and will publish, stories about a minor royal opening at Mars bar factory. You'll get pictures and so on. And then, if there's a transgression, which there often is, in particular by Charles, then that might be mentioned and is quickly put away. So you've got this kind of media thing. Even the BBC, which I've got a lot of time for, another great institution as far as I'm concerned. I don't always agree with it. But, even the BBC has got a blind spot on the monarchy, very deferential towards the monarchy.
Yeah.
Journalists generally just do not ask questions, So, when Charles is saying, well, I think, you want to cut down air travel, we need to cut down air travel to save the environment. Well, hopefully we would get a journalist one day to say, well, you're going to take a lead on this.
Yeah.
Are you going to take a lead on this, or are you just going to be hypocritical? Because that's what it is. You'll be hypocritical at it. So we've got all that. Then we're surrounded by stuff, aren't we? Like the Royal Mail and all the, the Royal Colleges and all the Royal this and the Royal that. So we've got all that going on. And then in schools, I was at the protest the other day when Charles visited Cardiff, as it happens, and all the school kids are there. And of course, they're coming along. It's a great day out for them, and they're waving the flags, and it's lovely in that sense. But it's from that day, isn't it? And in schools, there's a royal wedding, so a lot of schools will parrot that and do their own little royal wedding, and this is essentially a form of, it's kind of just like an indoctrination, really.
Yeah, 100%, yeah.
And we don't think in Labour Republic, that what's needed is, just pure Republican information, and that's it. We're just happy to have a balance, and let people make up their minds. And I said earlier on in this discussion, if people get to think about it because there's a debate, when that happens, people start to change their mind. And that's what the monarchy is really afraid of. In terms of the numbers, so the last polling from YouGov showed that 27% of people, it might have been 24, I can't remember, but anyway, identified as Republican. So that's at least a quarter of the population. So that's a lot of people who identify as Republican. Now, you wouldn't, if you're watching BBC or Sky coverage of any royal event, you would not believe that was the case. If you look at the number of royal commentators, royal biographers that are interviewed across our media, you would, versus the odd appearance by a Republican, that is nowhere near the sort of the 27%. And that has grown rapidly over the last 10 years or so. The really encouraging thing is that 27% of the population, yes, but actually, if you look at under 25s, it's 40%. So 40% of under 25s identify as Republicans. Now, I think that's great. I think it's because they, younger people, far less deferential. I think that's good. I think respectful is good.
Yeah.
But you don't have to have deference. You do not have to literally bow down to somebody who is only there because of accident of birth. They are no better than you. And that's really what brought me into the Republican movement, I guess. The other thing that was really, really interesting was is that on the same survey, 60% of people said that they wanted to keep the monarchy. But in actual fact, well, that sounds good, doesn't it? But 5 years ago, when the same question was asked, it was 75%. So over a period of just 5 years, the number of people who want to retain a monarchy has shrunken rapidly, We also had some polling during the Jubilee. And, I think if you can remember back to the Jubilee earlier this year, it was basically saturation on TV, saturation in the papers. But polling, again, I think it was YouGov, but polling certainly said that 54% of people were uninterested,
Right.
not interested in it. And only 14% of people said that they would actually be doing something. And what that means is, 14% of people at the Jubilee doing something, but 27% of people wanting to abolish the monarchy. So actually, twice as many people wanted to abolish the monarchy as planned to do something to celebrate the monarchy,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So all of these things are very, very, encouraging. And, it's with, like so much, it's like with younger generation, that the hope lies, because
Totally.
they have not had the indoctrination that older generations have. There's actually a very, very close sort of correlation between sort of support for the monarchy and support for Brexit, for example.
Yes.
Where the older you are, the more likely you are to support Brexit. Well, the older you are, the more likely you are to support the monarchy. So, the reason I'm so confident, we have to work for it. It's a really, really hard campaign. Don't get me wrong. We've got the forces of the state and the establishment against us. But the reason I'm so confident is because so much progress has been made. And the trend is in our direction. Okay. The trend is towards a situation whereby we don't have to call it republic, a situation whereby all the power, all of it, is in the hands of the people, not in the hands of people who were either born into power and privilege, or came about it from force of arms hundreds of years ago or whatever it might be. So that's why I'm so optimistic, James.
Well, that is very encouraging. I wasn't aware of those numbers. And it seems to me as if there is a grey area in the middle there that is disinterested either way. So hopefully, conversations such as this and others, can maybe lean some of those people into this side of the conversation, and perhaps could then be, an enhanced force for change.
I think so, James. I think the other important part of the context here is that, the monarch isn't just the monarch of Britain. The monarch has a number of realms. When I talk about monarchy, sometimes I just have flashes of Lord of the Rings. It is like a fantasy thing.
Yes, 100%.
Sometimes, right? But these realms, overseas realms, and of course, since the Queen was it came to the throne, the number of overseas realms has just about halved. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that when Barbados went earlier this year, I think it was, that tipped it over the edge to, half the realms had been lost. And it's quite clear Jamaica's going to go. Jamaica's going to go, and why wouldn't it? Australia is going to go. The new Labour government, or rather a new Labour government in Australia, one of their first acts was to appoint a minister for a republic. And probably then New Zealand will follow. So this, the monarchy puts a lot of store in the Commonwealth and the royal tours and so on. But that is going to be rapidly depleted over the coming years, I confidently predict. And I think also that diminishes the role of the monarchy. I think the third thing is that at the end of the day, we do have a 24-hour media, and a lot of the roles are essentially just celebrities.
Yeah.
That's what they are. They're celebrities. They do. Prince William pretends to be a DJ or whatever it might be. It's just like
soap opera.
It is a bit of a soap opera, and that at the end of the day. I think that probably wears a bit thin as well. So all these things are coming together, the democratic awareness, the change across the Commonwealth, the sort of view we have of the monarchy on a day-to-day basis being clearly as a family flawed. The mystique is gone. Okay. There was a time, a certain generation that thought, this is an absolute family to look up to.
Right.
But that's fallen away because what they've proven is that at best, they're no better than anybody else.
Yeah.
But in some cases, Prince Andrew being a really good one,
Yeah.
but a damn sight worse, So the mystique has fallen away. So all of these things come together, James, to propel this sense of actually, let's grow up on this and let's get a proper democracy going.
Damn right and well put. I mean, for me, I've always just instinctively kind of felt that it's mental that we have people right at the top of our political and, social hierarchy who are essentially just characters pulled out of a fairy tale, like princesses in castles and queens in golden chariots and really expensive headwear, and us peasants have to grovel and toil in order to chip in for them to all continue this royal lifestyle for no other reason than because they tell us that they're royal and we all go along with it. I mean, what century is this, I mean, if you're able to sort of squeegee away for a minute all of the lifelong indoctrination and programming you've had and just look at this with a fresh, clear set of eyes, surely anyone would think it was mental.
Well, I think the one thing everybody agrees, whether it's a monarchy, whether you're a monarchist or a republican or got no view, if we were to start again and you were to say, okay, I tell you what, let's think about how we're going to govern the country. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick a family, and that family, regardless of its background, of what it's done in the past, and it's regardless of its quality and its ability and its intelligence and its compassion and all these things, that family is going to rule forever, right? Absolutely nobody would sign up to that. Okay, nobody, because it's clearly a crazy way to govern a country. It's crazy, and the little bit of kind of I guess I'm going to say fun, but it's certainly not fun, but entertainment that people get from watching the royals and maybe dressing up, in Union Jack outfits and stuff is completely eclipsed by the fact that all of this power is concentrated in unelected hands.
Yeah.
And right now, in the hands of somebody who has demonstrated themselves to be incredibly political.
Right.
And it's really dangerous for any democracy, in my view.
Brilliantly put. Well, I wanted to do with you some popular mythbusters, but I mean, you've smashed some of them to bits already. One of the main responses you hear time and time again whenever you criticize any part of the existence of a royal family is that, they're so good for tourism. Now, I don't really think that's true, because tourists don't get to see the royal family. They get to see, the palaces and the castles and all, and the history and all that sort of stuff, and the artwork and all that sort of stuff that you see when you go and visit anywhere. But you don't actually see the actual royal family. The Queen isn't giving guided tours around Buckingham Palace. So the existence of a living, breathing royal family, I don't think that plays a role in tourism. The history of having a royal family more than likely does. I mean, if I go to somewhere like, Budapest or, anywhere, pick a point on the globe, man, India, France, anywhere. I'm going there for, the architecture, the history, even, as an atheist, I love going to see the churches of Rome and places like that. You don't have to buy into a living, breathing system in order to go in and revel in the majesty of the history of the thing. No one is saying that in removing a royal family that we tear down the palaces and burn the pieces of art and melt the gold down and make, hammers and sickles out of them. You keep all that stuff. But I don't personally feel that tourism is influenced at all by having an existing royal family. If that was the case, then France wouldn't be, I think, is the most visited country in the world. Like, France has the most tourists in the world. They don't have a royal family. They killed them all, America doesn't have a royal family. They do pretty good for tourism, and so do many other places around the world. So I've never really bought that one, and I know that you've covered this already, but let's just make double certain, just so we can finally put this undying myth to bed. Do the royal family create tourism?
No, James, they don't. In fact, it's neutral. Now, that's the view of Visit Britain, which basically is the government agency that basically looks after tourism. So it's neutral. They have changed some of the accounting practices to try and so that it appears that more revenue is generated as a result of the royal family. And I think I mentioned earlier, visits to Windsor, Legoland, for example. So the answer is, no, they don't. Right. And it would if people come to Britain to see the royal family, they're going to be really disappointed.
Yeah.
They're not going to see the royal
Yeah.
family. They're not, because they're either in the house or they're on holiday or doing something official. They're not going to see them. So,
yeah. And nobody is talking about tearing down the palaces, like I just said, and destroying all of the historic legacy of the royal families that we've had over the years. We keep all that stuff just the same as they do in every other country around the world. That's part of our history.
Well, this is a really good point. Like, as I say, we can keep the gold coaches. We can still have the state opening of Parliament with a president. We can still have Buckingham Palace. We probably won't, with a president, need as many palaces. And then we could go and hey, here's a good one. We could support Chris Packham's campaign for rewilding the royal estates after the monarchy spent a lot of time cutting down a lot of the trees so they could make it easy to shoot things. We could do all that, and then you'd have Buckingham Palace as maybe the state home of the president, and that would be really the end of it, and the rest of it could be open, 24/7 for tourists, and that actually might bring in a lot more revenue. You're right. Another myth. I mean, I don't know if you're going to reel them off to me, but one just occurred to me is that the monarch is a unifying figure.
Right. Well, do you know what? That was Mythbuster number 2, that they give us a proud and unified national identity. No. So you're a step ahead of me.
Okay, well, you didn't give me these in advance, but these regularly come up, and my answer to that is, well, how's that going? We've got a more divided society than ever.
Yeah.
We have got divisions in terms of the poorer and between poor and rich, and the rich getting richer and poor literally getting poorer, and that is a growing. That's a growing divide. We've got a case, more or less 50% of the population looking for independence in Scotland. We've got growing calls for independence, in Wales. We've got huge disparities between the various regions around the country. We had, Brexit, whatever side you were on, Brexit was a huge divide, and that still is with us because we see it in all sorts of reasons on immigration and so on. Now, one of the things that occurred to me with the head of state who's got, whose own website says, we're here to unite. It struck me that after the Brexit result, there was a huge spike in attacks on basically on people from other countries, from European countries, and indeed on Muslims and so on. There was a huge spike. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, that the head of state as a unifying figure, because it's not a political issue, Brexit is a political issue, but the way in which people reacted to Brexit, i.e. physically assaulting others, you would think, wouldn't you, you'd have a president coming on the TV, head of state coming on the TV and saying, well, look, the result is in, we must now all accept that and respect it, and to dissuade people from acting in that sort of way. But of course, the head of state says nothing.
Yeah.
Now, if you had a president with a mandate, the president would say something, would have a duty to say something. Presidents, across the world, if you look at them, they are genuinely well respected in terms of the not the executive, but in Germany, for example, in Ireland, the Irish President Martin, who's a working class guy, preceded by 2 women, one from the north of Ireland, one from the south, absolutely phenomenal. 2 women, and then a working class guy in that order as presidents, absolutely phenomenal. All of them with higher approval ratings than our monarch.
Wow.
It's amazing. So, there's lots of good things, lots of good reasons for a president, including they would be much better placed to be a unifying figure.
Amen to that. Brilliantly put once again. Well, you've already kind of smashed bits all of my other popular myths that I was going to throw at you in this segment. So we'll move on from that. And I am aware of the fact that I'm keeping you dangerously close to the promised amount of time that I was going to steal from you today. So I think there's quite a lot of information there. We've covered a hell of a lot of ground today. So to summarize then, You've laid a really strong case for why people should think about abolishing the monarchy at this point. So let's finish up by reminding people listening to this what your preferred model would be for the head of state, and if there is anywhere in the world that we can look at as an example of where that model is being used effectively.
Okay, so we're advocating that there are steps we should take now, like changing the oath and the Freedom of Information Act. Once we get to the stage where we have a head of state, it would be an elected head of state. It would be a written constitution. The Irish model is a really good one because their parliamentary system is very similar, and it would simply mean replacing what is currently the unelected head of state with a head of state who was elected. So they wouldn't have to be called the president. They could just be called the head of state. And their job would be to do the ceremonial stuff. And their job would be to protect our written constitution so that the politicians act in accordance with the constitution, with our laws.
Boom. In a nutshell. Nailed it. I personally don't see any problem with that, and I can't imagine why anybody else would either. You've laid it out very articulately, diplomatically, and brilliantly. So what can people do to get behind this and support the cause?
Well, there's lots of things you can do. So firstly, you can check out republic.org.uk, join Republic. If you're a member of the Labour Party, you can still look at Republic, obviously, but you can also look at Labour for a Republic, all one word, .org.uk. Join us and get involved. There's campaigns going on right now. There will be a huge campaign when it comes to the coronation, when that is announced. The coronation will be in London, of course. There will be a huge demonstration in London against this gross, waste of money first and foremost, but also this really undemocratic process. You can write to your MP. Write to your MP and just tell them, you'd like to live in a democracy. And what are they going to do about it? And have they? And if you're fortunate to have a Labour MP, say, have you checked out Labour for a Republic? And if not, why not? And they will come back to you. And they may say, well, I agree with you on this, I don't agree with you on that, but keep going, get your friends to do it. And it does make a difference because politicians do very much look at their postbag, or their email inbox, and that is important. Most MPs are very, very sort of reactive to that because that's the way our political process works. They are there to represent our views, not their own. So if enough of us write to our MPs, if you're in college, get every single person in your class or your college to write, if they agree, in your workplace. Get your work colleagues to write. The more the better, and that or email. And that's really, I think, the two things you do. Check out the two organisations, republic.org.uk and labourforrepublic.org.uk. Follow Labour for Republic. That's Labour #4 Republic on Twitter. There's lots of good stuff on that. You can engage that way as well.
Brilliant. Perfect. Nick, thanks so much for doing this today, mate. I really do appreciate it. It's been a really interesting and hopefully important chat. And before I let you go, I would just like to raise a glass and give a toast, not to the Queen or to the King, but to the Republic.
I have just raised my glass. You might have heard it clink in there. I've just raised it, and absolutely. It's going to be inevitable. With everybody's help, we'll get there sooner rather than later. Thanks, James, for having me on.
Anytime. Thanks so much for being with us, Nick. I'll see you again soon. Best wishes, man.
All the best, mate. Ta-da.
There you go, Nick Ward, ladies and gentlemen. Let's hear it for him. Interesting stuff, man. I really enjoyed that one. I would be really interested to know if there are any people who consider themselves to be royalists who've listened to the whole thing. Firstly, if you have done, I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. But I'd be really interested to know what you think. If you're listening to this on YouTube, please do leave a comment and let's have a conversation. I'd love to know what your response is to some of the points that Nick has raised there. I think Nick has laid out a very strong case there for us to broaden the narrative now around the royal family and start normalizing the notion of an elected head of state in this country. It goes without saying that I'm 100% in favor of that. And if you are too, and you'd like to get more involved, as Nick said, I'm going to plug the link one more time. The website is republic.org.uk. You can also check Republic out on Twitter at Republic Staff. And if you're a member of the Labour Party, you can join labourforarepublic.org.uk or follow them on Twitter at Labour4Republic. And if you are in favour of this, I think it's time for us to come out of the shadows now and to stop being so scared of being kicked the crap out of by people online and start normalising this conversation. You know, you're armed now with the figures and the comebacks and the myth busting. So hopefully now, we can all be better ambassadors for this issue when we're actually engaging with our friends and family who are royalists, and we can hopefully start to build some bridges and meet some middle ground. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you found it interesting and good food for thought. As always, please do subscribe to the podcast or give me a follow on whatever platform you listen to it on. Please do give me some stars and a review if you got time. I really do appreciate it. It would help me to nudge the podcast up through the algorithms. And please do get involved in the comments section and leave your thoughts there as well so that we can broaden the conversation on these issues. I'll be back next week with another episode and another awesome guest, so please stay tuned. In the meantime, as always, take care of yourself, take care of others, and I will see you next week. Have a good one.